All right, here we go. This is number 4, I think. This week was pretty cool and interesting, as usual. Last week, I know I showed off some stuff that kind of worked its way into the game, like flashlights and oh gosh, what decal effects. Um, and I bounce around to a lot of different things during the week, so it's sometimes hard to keep track of what's being changed. But I guess probably the most obvious thing is the first person mode, and that's something that I've been sort of going back and forth with for a while. And because I was initially developing the game to be purely purely third person with the possible addition of first person, and I I decided to add a camera so I could switch between sort of a first person point of view and a third person point of view, and it was I could just press tab and kind of like switch over, and I would sort of like flip back and forth occasionally when I was playtesting, and it just kind of became apparent that every single time I was in first person, the game felt way more scary and interesting and fun, you know. And I just something hit me this week, and I just thought, okay, enough's enough. Like I'm not gonna fight this anymore. Because the truth is doing first person is gonna be a lot more work. Um, a lot more work, but I think it's gonna be worth it. The third person I'm gonna have to implement anyway because other players are gonna see each other when they are playing with each other. But I think first person is gonna be really cool, and there's also a little bit of flexibility when I add other character classes that I might give players the option to be third person in certain character classes. Who knows? But there's a few reasons why I decided on this route, at least for now, and I'll go through a few of them, but just to have some fun things to kill while I do that, I'm going to use my fun. Actually, that's my little light that I'll talk about later too. But I got a little teleport, and this is where I'm starting to construct a level, the beginnings of a level design. So the first person really started to come about when, you know, I I I realized pretty early on that I didn't want this to feel like an arcade type of shooter, and I wanted to be able to distinguish this from COD Zombies in a pretty meaningful way. And I think one of those ways is by really emphasizing the survival horror aspects of these types of games, and introducing that type of stuff, because COD didn't really have that type of stuff. It's more a mainstream game. It was really accessible, and they had that going for them. But I do want this to be more of a kind of a hardcore game. I want there to be more of an expectation that this is going to be very difficult, and it's going to be there's a lot of scarcity, and there's a lot of more horror elements to it. And also, third person just didn't feel good. Well, I guess I'll piggyback off my last thought, because I started to realize that in third person, having a tight space, like, and this is like kind of way too open. I'm thinking like tighter spaces, where you kind of feel claustrophobic. Those things don't work as well in third person, or at least they're maybe harder to design, because there's a bunch of things that are happening, like camera collision there's a camera behind you, and when it touches certain things, it has to get closer to the character, or if it's not getting closer, it has to make certain walls invisible. And it just seemed like a lot of stuff to go through and consider when every single time I'm in a first person point of view and I can see these zombies like way up close and in my face. It's it's just freaking it just seems so much more fun. So, and there's other reasons too, but I don't want to beat a dead horse. I think this is the path that I'm on right now, and I'm pretty excited about it. So, another thing is these zombie skins. I've got some variations, and I'm kind of playing with different ways that I can uh, vary the appearance of the zombies. And if you can see, the zombie on the left and the zombie on the right both are different color variations, which is really just a flat, you know, a hue change on the material in the material instance. And I thought, okay, well that's cool. That could add a little bit of nuance. Um, but I not only just did that, I also added other zombies with entirely different skins, and as you'll notice, walk cycles too. And that like this silly outfit, I didn't that one's still bugging me, but this one I like the belt and the jean shorts and the emo haircut. This one is very cool. I also moved around some of the vertices on this base mesh because they both share the same mesh with the same vertices, and I kind of pumped up pushed out the butt and pulled out some breasts too, um, which might be hard to see. I'll, instead of having to kind of fight with this, I'll just sort of detach here, and let's see if I can see these bad boys. So yeah, like this guy here, you can kind of see his butt's a little more. His butt, his butt's pushed out, her butt's pushed out, the boobs. Uh, so yeah, I had a blast kind of doing that, and there's still much more to be done with the zombies in terms of making them more dynamic. I'm not crazy about the walk cycles yet. I'm not crazy about the way the horde uh, is sort of behaving, and they're of course clipping. Their capsule collision component uh, is blocking the other zombies. So there are times when they're sort of trying to squeeze together to get to me, and they wind up producing enough friction or whatever that the engine just sends them flying, which is hilarious, but not something I want in the final game, obviously. So there's quite a bit of finesse that needs to be done in that realm too. But with that said, I've I'm at a pretty interesting point where I'm actually able to design the level, like I mentioned, and the reason that that's possible, or the reason I really decided to dive more into that, is because of destructible barriers that I programmed into the game. And in fact, I'll show you what those look like. But first, it's so much more visceral having these zombies like right in your face. This vacant expression is kind of weirdly terrifying too, even with this retro aesthetic. Like I'm like, sometimes I get a little freaked out. And important thing to point out about these skins also is that they don't really actually have any geometry. They're just materials, and that could change. Uh, but it just depends on performance. If I could add some cloth simulation, or some some meshes like a t-shirt that I can skin to the rig that can be interchangeable, and kind of figure out a system to sort of really vary these spawns to make them interesting, then I'll definitely be exploring all the options that I have. Not to mention, I lost my train of thought. I lost it. That's right. I'm sure it'll come back. So, right, destructible barriers. So this is something that I spent quite a bit of time on, and it's basically just a blueprint, and I'll show you what it looks like. It's got a function to handle health, because it has health. It has also a health bar widget that displays the health, just like the zombies. It has a health component, which is a C++ component. Of course, it executes on the server, the damage dealt to it, and it has just a few meshes. One's the blockade door and the doorway, and this will sort of change over time, in the sense that this blueprint will become a template for all of its children, and I imagine all the children, it might be a doorway, it might be a window, it might be a pile of trash that's destructible. This is sort of thinking ahead, because doing each of those is going to be its own pretty big project, because it's going to require levels of detail, levels of damage, which is something I haven't really quite haven't figured out yet, but I have ideas. Like, for example, if this had 100 health, then it might start displaying a different mesh that represents damage at 75 health, and then another mesh that has even more damage at 50 health, so on and so forth, which is a pretty common thing that we've all, people who played games, see that kind of stuff, and especially in older games. So that's one idea I've had. I wish I had an example to show you, but I'm just gonna have to take my word for it if you don't know what I'm talking about. And this is something I can place all over the map, and I can edit them in a centralized way in this blueprint. And when I have more variants of this destructible blockade, well, then I will be able to spawn those and edit different instances of the blueprint on the map, and add kind of debris or explosions or whatever it's going to necessitate. And the zombies respond to this. They want it. When they wake up, that's what they want. And while we're at it, I wanted to show you what zombie AI looks like. I'll show you the brain of the zombie. And that's in the behavior tree. And in fact, why don't we just show you how it happens in real time. So right now it's moving to blockade. Turn on those lights, and now it's not moving to blockade. It is another key, a blackboard key has been set, and that means that it will move to the player target, which of course is me. So I'll restart the map, and you can sort of see that they're moving to blockade. And the reason they're moving to the blockade is because right now that they're overlapping it. They have a big collision sphere that's pretty big. You can see these little red things. Once that red starts to detect a blockade blueprint, an instance of a blockade, then it changes the behavior of the zombie to go to it. And that's really all it does now. It just goes to it, and the damage that the zombie does to the blockade is really applied by the zombie standing near it via another overlap event. So the zombie doesn't actually have any type of damage dealing capability yet. But this is good enough to start to play around and see like what the AI is going to do. Like right now I'm standing on a ledge, which they should be able to attack me if I'm here. You know, if they can't, then there will be something I'd have to resolve in the game. But you know, if I move slightly back onto the ledge, well, now they're coming back up. So zombies aren't too... They are very exploitable right now, to say the least. And these are good. This is really valuable stuff that I need to know, you know, sooner than later. And having these great blockout tools, one of the very few things that I purchased, you know, to help assist me in making this game was this blockout tools pack, and it was like $15, and it just gives like a really fast way of building a level and seeing what's going to work. And I guess just so if you're curious, the red sphere is an overlap sphere. It has no collision, physical collision or anything. It's just a query that looks for certain overlaps, and then these little things around the zombies' arms and legs. That comes from the physics asset, and in those are coded in different things that basically determine how it reacts to a physical simulation. And the pink thing that's sort of encompassing the whole thing here is the capsule component. And the capsule component is just basically another form of collision that is used to detect how close the zombie can get to other people, usually, or other zombies. And the reason they're bouncing around a little bit right now is because they're colliding on each other in a weird way. So that's something like I said earlier, is I'm gonna have to look at. So yeah, and actually a cool thing to see too is that in the constructor of the zombie is really the randomization of how the zombie is created, and the construction script is really just what script is ran when this object is being created. So if I compile, it'll create a variation, so I can sort of have a cool visualization of what's really possible when this zombie spawns. And I say zombies singular because this is one blueprint that's spawning. There's no extra things. So let's see here. Another thing that was a pretty huge victory for me, which I won't go too much into the technical stuff because I know I'll screw it up if I try to explain it, because I barely understand it still. But I figured out, I did a lot of research on casting, and blueprint to blueprint communication, and I found out how to turn on these lights by overlapping this little square. And not via direct casting, and not via through the level blueprint, which contains a memory address of the things that are in the world. I did this through a multicast that starts in here. Well, actually, you know what? I am going to try to go and dive into it just for a second, because it's pretty cool, and it'll maybe help me understand it too. So this, I call it it's a switch, and it's not rendered in game. It's just a square, and well, it is rendered in game right now, but it's not going to. But when I overlap it, it casts to me, or to a player pawn. And if it succeeds, then it calls this multicast debug light. Or this event dispatcher. And then it delays, and then it resets, because it'll only do it once. That way I don't, just stand in here and then have the lights flicker on and off, for a million years. And also I, have a chance to kind of like leave the area and then come back and be like, so it's a nice switch. So anyway, it calls this delegate debug lights, which is this event dispatcher, and the people that are listening, or the objects that are listening, are these lights. And in here, which I call debug light, that event debug light is bound to on begin play, it's bound to this custom event handle switch on. So when I overlap the thing, it sends a signal, which all of the instances of this light are listening for. And based on this condition, on or off, like I showed you, moving into the cube or out of the cube, it will set the intensity of the brightness of the light. And that intensity is either 15,000 or 0. And there's a lot of other cool things that can happen with this event dispatcher. For example, not just lights turn on when they're called, they also call this thingy over here, which is a debug door. And the same dispatcher is bound. I don't know if I'm saying this in the right order, but the same functionality or whatever is bound to event play in this blueprint to another custom event called block off zombies, which is an early way that I kept zombies out of coming into this, this base or whatever. And so it's the same signal. It's listening for the same event dispatcher, but it has a different functionality, and it really just closes the door, animates a little cube, and I'll show you what that looks like. It looks like, if you see these two doors here, when I overlap here, it closes. When I overlap here, they open. So it's pretty cool. It took me a while. It's taking me a while to understand certain concepts and like be able to sort of work with them pretty freely. So this week was a pretty major victory in terms of me understanding game logic and how blueprints can communicate with each other effectively and not waste resources on things like a cast to all actors of a class, that's things like that are notoriously really expensive on the memory and whatnot. Okay, so there's that. We've got zombies. We've got rudimentary damage to the environment. We've got debug lights that really help me just sort of not have to worry too much about adjusting lights, and I can do it all in engine or in the during runtime. I've got zombie AI that's in progress, and of course first person, which is pretty interesting. I never it's been cool kind of learning more about like what first person is, like what happens. And as you can see, this is very strange that my character is just arms, which is very odd indeed. And the reason that is I think is really just so it only draws stuff that the player is going to see in their first person camera. And there's also other things too, like you might run the risk of clipping into your, into camera view if you kept the rest of the mesh visible. But this is, it's pretty cool because it gives me freedom to sort of depict how I want the player to experience first person, while at the same time give everyone else in the match an opportunity to see what I've designed to be seen in third person. So the third person mesh is still there. It's the game still calls that. But if the first person camera is activated, then the other one will be hidden, and vice versa. If that makes sense. But of course the third person character will always be visible to other players, but it won't be actually drawn if it's to the player themselves who's in first person if they do access the first person camera. So it's a little confusing. It's easy to trip over. It's easy to trip over myself, and believe me, I do quite a bit. But it's a lot of extra work for something that I think is really worth it, and I'm sold on that at this point. And of course, this gun I got from a free pack. I'm going to be redesigning it and optimizing it. It's way too high poly for my purposes anyway. And there's going to be a lot of interesting things happening with the hands and making the animations for the gun, and making all of that really functional. It's going to be quite a process. But I'm excited to get into it, and I'm excited to get this guns sort of animating in terms of like the recoil and the fire animation, and having shells pop out, and having a little bit of steam or smoke coming out of the chamber, and it's going to be I think it's going to be really freaking cool. And of course, right now when I spawn in, it's kind of a perfect example of what I mean, where the angle I'm viewing this right now is not very optimal, because I can actually see my character. So if I didn't have just the arms and I had the whole body, well, this is what you would likely get. At least to some degree, you'd wind up with artifacts and weird stuff happening, and this is just a far better solution. And I guess I do want to mention another thing regarding the survival horror aspect of this game, because if you've been watching these, or scrubbing through them, curious kind of what direction it's going in, I really like I said before, I really want this to emphasize survival horror and like a sense of scarcity and vulnerability. And one of the things I want is just to I guess, implement things that make the game feel exactly like that and create a really strong distinction between each level of gameplay. Call of Duty Zombies, the early ones that I'm most familiar with, did that pretty well. You sort of started kind of lackadaisical. You can kind of jump around. You can knife zombies. You could, find out your strategy. You want to save your money and go to the mystery box and make other people do the work, and and not buy a gun. Uh, uh, there's sort of this like stage of COD zombies where in early waves you could just sort of socialize basically, and before you knew it, the waves were getting so intense that you couldn't do anything but just focus on the game. And if you were lucky, you got to mid to late game, and someone or a few people had a mystery, a ray gun, and you could get a pack a punch and yada yada yada. And that was kind of that was the best case scenario. And then you'd rinse and repeat. Similarly, in 7 Days to Die, which is like another game that I think is totally fantastic, really has a distinct early, mid, late game. And I'm not mentioning zombie games because this is like unique to them, because other games have it too. It's just they're on my mind. And 7 Days like had this really cool early game where you really struggled to just kind of stay alive, and then of course you kind of get set up, and then there's this like second or third kind of story beat in like your time as a player in that game, where you have to start building towards defending your base on Horde Night. So I think that creating that sense of anxiety for the player, creating just enough stakes and anxiety to keep the player interested in moving to the next place to relieve that anxiety, without sort of overwhelming people or making them feel just like incredibly frustrated by playing the game. That's something that I'd like to strike a balance with, that I find fun. And I like the pacing of both of those games, and it's going to take some time, but reloading, for example, I don't want to just have a gun that shoots in perpetuity like I do now. That is not my intention. In an earlier devlog, I mentioned GoldenEye, and that's something that I definitely love and I still think about. And I do want to give players an ability to choose how they want to play this game. If at least more so than COD Zombies did. I'm not really sure what that's going to look like, but I want people to, if people want to play really aggressively, I don't want the game to hold them back and say, no, you can't do that yet. I want people to do sort of act on their instincts and face the consequences, and have other people in the game face the consequences for other people's actions. Because my market, as far as I'm concerned, the game that I want to play, I think the game that the people that would likely buy this game are groups of friends, because I don't have any plans of running a dedicated server that hosts matches. That of course could change, but it'll be like a 7 Days to Die experience where one person sets up a listen server, and people, presumably people who know each other or are friends of friends or whatever, they'll be the ones who are playing this. So I'm not too concerned about anti-cheat measures or trying to protect against griefers or any of that bullshit. I'd rather just make a game that I think is really really fun and kind of hardcore, and would be a really dynamic experience for people who know each other, and are, mature. So there's a lot of opportunity there that and those are things that are running through my head, constantly. And if I am going to be, a lot of this, what I'm saying, really kind of to players would mean one thing: the game is slower than you'd think. It is slower. It's a little bit more. It's more of a slow burn. I want to be able to boot it up and be able to walk around and not be bombarded with, text and numbers and stuff like that. But I do want people who are really interested in a challenge. I want them to be. I want their appetites to be satisfied. Because that's the stuff that I like. So, yikes. We got a lot of zombies on screen. So waves will be smaller, and we'll just keep moving forward, inch by inch. But with that said, I don't think I have too much else to add. This week, I'm just going to keep pushing forward. I try to kind of listen to my intuition in terms of like what needs to be done. Try not to spend too much time on anything. Once I kind of have a general grasp of something, I tend to just move on, because there's so much that I don't know that I just have to keep hopping to the next thing. But eventually, sooner than later, I'll get closer to a playable demo, and that's one thing I don't think I've discussed too much in the public development blog, which is my roadmap. And my goal is to have a playable demo in 6 months since starting development, which was 2 months ago, a little over 2 months ago. So it's it's a bit of a crunch, and especially having really very little experience in game development and almost no experience in game programming. It is quite it's an ambitious goal, but we'll see where I get. There's lots of resources for games like this in terms of tutorials and whatnot. So it's not like I'm just, going to the library and checking out books on C++ and etc. and like figuring all this out. There's a lot. I've gotten a lot of help and there's a lot of resources. So probably the best thing I have going for me is just a lot of motivation, and we'll see how it looks. And I think in a week or two, I'll probably start showing people what the very first development blog looked like, which is something I didn't even put out in public because it was so new. My first week of development, when I decided, in my mind that I'm going to make a game, I shared that type of stuff with my friends, and I didn't want to share it with anyone else because it's like I guess I just felt kind of insecure, and like I had really no business, showing the progress of the game that I was making, because I had no freaking clue what I was doing. But I don't even know if I was right in thinking that. I still don't have any clue, and I don't think, the more you know about this stuff, the more you realize how little you know. So probably wouldn't have mattered, but I'll show people what it looked like early on, because it's one thing that I really like about doing this, is that I get to sort of look back and, if I'm ever discouraged or think like, oh, I'm not making enough headway, if you just like go back just a little bit and you can see like, oh my God, this is a lot different than it was. Oh, and I know it's a little bit bright on screen. I'm sorry, but these are little makeshift grenades. Let's see if I can aim up a little bit. There we go. They don't do any damage yet, but I'm gonna have some grenades in the game, which is I mean, that just seems like a no-brainer. You have to have grenades. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. And have a great week. Don't forget to drink water and enjoy your life. And I'll see you soon. I love you.